Anyway, we asked Jerry Goldsmith what he thought of LPs generally and whether the music from a picture helped promote it.
Almost definitely I do. I don't think that most of it is, is really that good to sit and listen to over and over again. But, there's a strange sort of a theory that if a picture's successful enough, you can release an album of blank grooves and it'll sell. But I've also found some very interesting things. Many times over the years, people will say, producers will say, well, look, we've got a troubled picture, you got to save it with the music. Well, it's ridiculous because no bad picture has ever been saved by a good score. But conversely, I must say that a good picture has saved many bad scores. So, in essence, what I'm trying to say is that the picture's good, everything else is good, including the music.
Jerry Goldsmith. Jerry, welcome to Star Sound, and first of all, let me ask you straight away, how did you actually start composing music for films?
Well, that's a long story, and not a simple story. After finishing my studies, I realized it was a very difficult proposition to make a livelihood as a composer. I did want always to write music for films because I'd always been attracted to the theater and the application of music and drama. But how to get attention was a big problem. In my case, I started as a clerk, typist at CBS in Hollywood. A rather unglamorous way, but my 6 months of typing in junior high school paid off because I was able to type scripts. So actually, with a lot of persistence and nagging on my part, I was engaged in the music department of CBS within a year after going there as a typist.
And that, of course, eventually led to you doing a lot of TV programs. What were some of the titles that you worked on during your early days in television?
When I was at CBS, I did Gunsmoke, Perry Mason, a little series called Have Gun Will Travel, Twilight Zone. It's hard to think of them all. Then I was released. That's, should I say, my option was not picked up. They had no longer any need for my services, and that's when I did Dr. Kildare, which was the first show I did on a freelance basis.
Well, there's the theme from one of the best followed TV series we've ever had, I think, in this country, Dr. Kildare. But Jerry Goldsmith, did you always intend to be a composer right from the start, films or otherwise?
Yes, I think since I was 14 I had made that decision. I was terribly interested in drama, the use of music in drama. I worked extensively with the opera and ballet departments in college as a coach and a conductor, and I was always fascinated with this aspect of it. Also, there was the economics. I wanted to compose, but one cannot really make a proper livelihood writing symphonic music and waiting for a grant or a commission. And I had no desire to teach, which is another alternative. And this seemed to be the best solution, which has worked out fine because, in a way, it subsidizes a certain number of concert works that I can write. I'm able to make a proper living composing music for films and then be able to take a certain amount of time to write a concert work.
Well, career-wise, we've got you as far as Dr. Kildare. What were the next major steps?
Well, I think Dr. Kildare was a result of my being released from CBS and on my own. After that, I did another television show, Man from U.N.C.L.E., which became a rather instant hit, too. I think it was also a very successful show over here. As a matter of fact, I know it was a successful show here.
Very.
My name is Napoleon Solo. I'm an enforcement agent in Section 2.
Of course, that television success became a film series as well. But still, during those early days, Jerry, in the 60s, that is, what was the film that really established you?
Really, the first big film I did, the major film I did, which really got me going, was Lonely or the Brave with Kirk Douglas, which has become somewhat of a cult film now.
That's one when he's a sort of contemporary cowboy.
Yes.
He can't really get on and rides his horse over the mountains.
Yeah, beautiful film.
Yeah, lovely film.
And I got that film really because of Alfred Newman, who had no connection with the film or the studio at the time, but had been an admirer of mine for, unbeknownst to me, for many years. And he had been watching my career at CBS. And I got to meet him on several occasions, and when this film came along, he leaned very heavily on the head of the music department at Universal to hire me for the film, and subsequently they did, and it really sort of launched me in major film, because I did, I think, 5 successive films in a row at Universal right after that, including Freud, which I think was the 3rd feature I did, which I got my first Academy nomination for.
Well, let's hear part of your soundtrack for that first one, Lonely Are the Brave, with Kirk Douglas. And, while we were talking about Lonely Are the Brave, another early one that you did, Freud, and I don't think that was particularly well known in this country, though I think it was actually shown here. Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, it seems that the world as a whole does not look upon psychoanalysis with a great deal of favor. I know I did that film in Rome, so we had sort of a multi-nation company working on it, and the majority of the technicians in the post-production were English, and I was having great arguments with them constantly. The point being, I would not expect that film to be a great box office success in England or anywhere else in Europe, as it was not. As a matter of fact, didn't do too well in the States. I think it was achieved a great critical acclaim, but box office did not do well at all.
Well, as I admitted earlier, I haven't actually seen it, but I don't see why that should prevent us from hearing some of the music that you did for it. I imagine you wrote quite a lot of music for that film. Is there a particular piece that you'd like to hear?
Well, if you can find the main title, I think that's rather an interesting piece.
We can find the main title.
Okay.
I said I haven't seen the film, but that music certainly sounds very Freudian. Now, another biography you were involved in, a very different one, was the story of General Patton, in which, although there wasn't all that much music, it did add a great deal to the film. Do you have very strong and clear-cut feelings about the exact purpose music should serve when you're writing the themes for a film?
Yes, very much so. The basic purpose is to comment, to highlight on the non-visual element. Of course, there are other times where you will be forced to comment to reinforce a visual statement. I think that I can best state it in the picture Patton. It's a big leap but I think Patton, to me, best identified my feelings on film scoring, because here was a character, a 3-tiered character, as I saw him. That of a warrior, that of a religious man, that of a believer in reincarnation, the past. And you only saw the one facet of this man. I felt that the music must constantly remind the audience that this was a multifaceted, multi-layered personality. So the music had 3 layers to it. It had the military aspect, it had the religious aspect, and it had the archaic aspect. These 3 units were all playable as separate units, or they could be combined together, as in the main title and various other moments in the film. Never was any of this apparent on the screen. I think that to me is, at least in my case, was the high point of film scoring for me.
Jerry Goldsmith's score for the film Patton. And Jerry, another thing that seems to illustrate to me, that particular film, which was 3 hours long, is a certain feeling for economy in film music that you have, because I believe that the actual music duration in that 3 hours was only just over half an hour.
That's correct.
And that was presumably a conscious decision that you and the director took, that you were not going to have music going the whole way through like you do in many films.
That's right. I really am loath to having so much music in a film. I feel that when you have a film that is stuffed with music, you have a film that has problems. And the music isn't going to help it anyway. Too much music is defeating its own purpose. I think my most successful scores have been those with the smallest amounts of music in. Last year, Chinatown had only 28 minutes of music, and I think I've gotten more acclaim for that score practically than anything I've done before.
Talked there about Chinatown, and before that about Patton, and of course, Jerry, those are 2 of your more recent films. But following your career through, let's move back a little bit. We had Lonely Are the Brave we've had, and Freud. What was the next major step in your film music career after that?
Well, I would say Lilies of the Field. I loved the film. It was a film made by all of us for nothing, with a lot of dedication and a lot of charity involved, because there was just no money to make that picture. The director hawked everything he had, and I think if he had gone 1 minute overtime, he would have been without a roof over his head. The picture cost like $250,000 and grossed nearly $10 million. So on figures like that, there's a lot of profit to be made.
So afterwards, you must have been quite pleased that you did the music, too.
Yes, it didn't hurt me at all. It was quite a nice step in my career. The album did very well. It was fun taking a authentic spiritual and using it in a creative way, developing the piece into a more sophisticated means. And I enjoyed the film very much.
From Lilies of the Field. Now, Jerry, another piece of yours that we've had many requests for is The Prize. In fact, we featured it recently in our program about the film Harmonic. Any special memories about working on that film?
That was sort of my first encounter into really what one would call the glamour Hollywood, because here we have this superstar, Paul Newman. It was fun because it was a chance to do mystery, a bit of humor, and romance all at once.
When do you actually start to compose the music?
I'll start the music when I have a final cut. In other words, when the picture is locked in.
But you wouldn't sort of begin to toy with ideas for themes, possibly, after you've seen the script in the first place. You do want to see the finished film before you even begin to write.
I cannot work from a script at all. I prefer not to read scripts, because what one reads is so many times totally different than what reaches the screen, because you are dealing in a visual medium, and you have to react emotionally to what one sees on the screen, not what one reads. I can get a film in a rough state and perhaps play around with some themes and some ideas, but I cannot begin to sit down and compose it until it is locked into its final form.
Well, let's stop again at this point and hear what that final form was for The Prize. The main theme from The Prize. Now, Jerry, you said earlier that you preferred not to overload a film with music, but there is one film I can think of that you scored that does have a lot of music in it, and that's Otto Preming's production In Harm's Way. Well, obviously that film demanded a big score. There were various plots and subplots and numerous characters, the backdrop being the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. Was In Harm's Way a difficult assignment? In fact, how did you come to be involved in it?
Well, I was hired by Otto Preminger to work on that picture. And
that was the only one, I think, wasn't it, that you've done for Preminger?
Yes, well, Otto usually only uses a composer once. And I think it's by mutual consent, frankly. But he's a rather demanding fellow, and it was an interesting experience for me, I must say. The film didn't do too well, but I happen to like certain aspects of the film. This had the aspects of war, but also, again, you had romantic involvements, a lot of personal involvements. For me, I have to have the personal identification with people. In Harm's Way did give that to me.
Well, I think we ought to hear a part of your score, and here's a romantic medley which you wrote quite intentionally in the style of Glenn Miller. Jerry, one of my own great favorites among the film scores that you've done is The Blue Max. Was that a film that you found a great deal of pleasure in working on?
I found a great deal of pleasure in working on it and writing it. Unfortunately, it became a little bit upsetting when it came to dubbing it and recording it. The director and I didn't see eye to eye at all. 1/4 of the music that I wrote for the picture ended up in the film, and the rest of the music was just the reuse of the main title over and over again. I saw war in one aspect, and he saw it as a different aspect. My way of portraying battles and the retreat of an army was not exactly what he had in mind. I really don't know what he had in mind, quite frankly. But from a musical and a dramatic approach, I think that it was one of the best things I've done. And it was certainly one of the most exciting things to do, to record with a 100-piece orchestra and to be able to write and have this kind of scope.
Main titles from the Blue Max. Well, now let's turn to one of your more recent assignments, Papillon. I don't suppose you had too many difficulties on that, because the director, Franklin Schaffner, was someone you'd worked with many times before.
I had problems on that one.
That wasn't a war film.
No, that wasn't a war film. How about that? Franklin was absolutely right. Here again was approach, the idea of Montmartre, to keep this character, this feeling running through the picture. And I kept fighting him on it. I said, I'm afraid. I'm afraid it's too obvious. He said, no, it's not. And I struggled, and what I originally started out with musically developed into a very Bouvalier tune that was strictly out of Montmartre. And I'm not ashamed to admit that I was looking in the wrong direction. And the last section is really where one really got the development of the theme, because that's where the real relationship between Dustin Hoffman and Steve McQueen really gelled together. And somehow, when I got to writing it in that area, the whole French thing blossomed and it all happened.
I must draw your attention to another of your fans, David Drake, this is, of Hookston Chase, Harrogate in Yorkshire, because I have a letter from him here, and he says, whatever you do on your Goldsmith program, you've just got to include something from Planet of the Apes. Well, I think we ought to do that for him, don't you? Maybe you'd like to say something about your score, Jerry.
That was a difficult picture because being a futuristic fantasy, science fiction, whatever one wants to call it, totally absurd, black comedy, all these aspects, how does one treat it musically? I want to make music with a standard orchestra and yet create a different aspect. People still say, well, you did it electronically, and there's nothing electronic in the picture at all. It is all done with a standard symphony orchestra, with a few odd percussion instruments, but that's all.
Part of the score from Planet of the Apes, and whatever you may think about that, no electronic cheating of any sort. Meanwhile, what about Bandolero getting right away from the electronics again?
Well, Bandolero, strangely enough, the theme had a lyric by Sammy Kahn called There's Got to Be a Better Way. Did smashing here in England much better than it did in the States. I don't know why. I was delighted. But I had quite a success with that tune over here. So that's about all I can say about it. Really.
Bandolero. Jerry Goldsmith, something that must have been a very, very different assignment from that was the film Justine.
Yeah, interesting. Going back to the Middle East again, that was really the first time I had that kind of assignment where having a story set in the Middle East, and a very exotic story. And I'm very fond of that score. For me, it was fun musically because, again, I guess I'm a romantic, wonderful, rich, romantic, exotic locales and relationships, and it was very melodic, and for me it was a fun score to do. I really enjoyed doing it very much. I just wish the film had been better received, that's all.
Pity about the film, but let's hear the music. Jerry, once again trying to prove that it wasn't only war films and the occasional bit of romance. You did actually do a comedy, didn't you? Take Her, She's Mine.
Yes, I did. I did several comedies. Take Her, She's Mine, Trouble with Angels. I love writing comedy music. I think it's difficult, but I love the gags. And
musical gags.
Yeah, rather than making them with funny noises, I'd like to do them by implications. But the overall frustration of comedy is the fact that when you're really successful, everybody's laughing so hard, they never hear the music anyway. So, you know, it becomes a frustrating thing. It's fun to do, and it's fun to laugh when you're doing it, but then when it gets on the screen in a theater, the audience are laughing all the way through it. Hopefully, if you're successful. So I don't know what's the point. So I try to stay away from it.
Jerry, we've been through an awful lot of your films now. Earlier on, you were talking about your classical training and also the fact that you did other work outside. I know that you've written a ballet and a cantata, but do you do a lot of music outside the film world?
Not as much now as I should. I know the Australian Ballet did a ballet of mine, and did a cantata with Ray Bradbury, which we did in Los Angeles.
But do you find that you want to do that? Do you find writing film music fairly satisfying, or do you wish you could spend more time doing other kinds of music as well?
No, I love doing film music. I really do. But, yes, I should spend more time doing my concert music. And I guess the time will come when I will do it.
At the same time, I'm sure the time will never come when you actually give up writing film music, and so we look forward to hearing many more magnificent Goldsmith scores. Meanwhile, Jerry, thank you very much for coming in to talk to us on Star Sound. And can I ask you to say goodbye by choosing from the whole spectrum of your film history so far, one last piece of your film music?
Well, now...
That's a question.
Let's say goodbye with Sand Pebbles. I think it's has one of the loveliest melodies I've ever written in there, which became a very successful song, and We Were Lovers. But I think it's one of the most poignant pieces of music I've ever written.
Well, Jerry, thanks again, and we'll have the love theme. Jerry, nice to have you with us again.
Lovely to be here again.
Now, last time that I talked to you, we talked a lot about your earlier film music, so I think really the best thing we can do is to carry on where we left off, as though we never paused in the first place. What I was wondering, actually, is whether, in fact, there is some sorts of film you find it more difficult to write music for, or do you sit down with equal enthusiasm and ability, regardless of what sort of music it is?
I think the most difficult film to write music for is the film where the characters are not really cleanly delineated. And if you have a film where you feel that the audience will not care for these people, or really not get involved with them, then somehow it's very difficult to write, for me to write the music at least.
Do you feel that, in fact, the music can strengthen characters and sharpen them up when you play it in the background?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's, to me, is one of the great assets of the Patton score. And again, it was something I tried to do with MacArthur.
Mm-hmm.
Although there was the problem is, here's another general but a different kind of personality, and naturally everybody's going to say, well, he did Patton, it'll be the same thing, and to make it as different as possible, and yet still get inside the character and try and bring some unseen or unsaid quality of this man out.
So if one listens carefully to a Jerry Goldsmith score, in fact, are there perhaps different themes or at least different treatments of the same theme as different characters are on the screen?
Almost definitely.
Does that apply to Cassandra Crossing?
In Cassandra, there was just one general, very romantic theme that went through the whole picture because there was rather an overall romantic quality about the picture, and I preferred to play that aspect more than the obvious apparent action, because I think that in order for the film to be successful with an audience, you've got to care about somebody, and in this case it was Richard Harris and Sophia Loren. The action was self-serving, but unless the audience cared what was happening to these people and all of these action scenes, then it didn't make any difference. One becomes the same as the other.
Jerry, a film really very different from that was The Swarm. Now, how did you find that musically when you started to compose it?
Busy. I won't say the B. Yes. Again, it was one of those kinds of pictures where there had so many characters, but there was not one character you could really get involved with. So it really became the threat of the bees all the time.
I'm just wondering what it's like when you start. You know, somebody asks you to do this, and you think, oh my God, bees. What do I do to them? How do I not be hackneyed about them?
Well, what I did finally is I just used the notes B-E-E as the motif for the score. I was really quite desperate to get some kind of a signature for them. And I kept saying I will not use any chromatics, and of course it's all still chromatics. As a matter of fact, one of the critics said that as soon as they heard Jerry Goldsmith's music and the main title, they broke out into laughter. It's just inevitable when you're doing a motion picture about bees that it's open to all sorts of remarks and jokes. I think to me the most exciting and original piece in it is the arrival of the bees. There was one particular shot in here in slow motion that had a certain almost balletic quality to it. And I wrote this long sequence. It's a sort of a la valse of the bees. And it came up quite well. I like that one very much.
Well, you were talking there before the bees began to arrive and swarm about the laying yourself open to being maybe laughed at or different interpretations. I'll tell you something. I saw Coma when it was on, and we played the love theme, and I got a letter from somebody who found that hysterically amusing that a film like Coma, which is pretty oppressive, should have a love theme at all. In fact, it went rather well, I thought.
Well, Coma was really a very interesting picture to do, and the love theme was certainly legitimately used in the film. There was a 3-minute montage with no dialogue, a beautiful love scene, and it had to be.
Well, it certainly was justified, and right now, nobody is going to laugh, and we're going to play the love theme from Coma. You were talking earlier about The Swarm not having been the most successful of films. One film that I think was absolutely brilliant that you worked on, Capricorn 1. Did you find that an easy one to do?
It's like most films, they're all difficult to get started. And with Capricorn, it was a struggle to get it going. But once it happened, it went very, very quickly. It was fun. It was a different kind of orchestra I used, and I thought the picture was super.
You say you had a job getting started on it, though. I'm interested by how you actually do start. What's the first thing you do when you're commissioned to write a score?
Well, it depends. I mean, a picture that is of a more romantic nature than one tries to find a love theme.
Yes. Are you doing this at the piano, though, or are you sitting in an armchair just dreaming of themes, or what are you doing?
I do my best work on taking a shower, actually. I have one of those pens that right underwater. No.
You must be very clean after a difficult film, then.
No, I usually work with the piano. I try to find that piece of material, and out of that will evolve everything for the picture.
Well, can we listen to some of the work that you did for Capricorn 1? Would you like to choose a piece from the soundtrack?
I think the opening credits are rather exciting.
Now, a film that you wrote the music for that I've just seen, and in fact found very frightening apart from anything else, is Magic. Did you see anything of that while it was actually in production?
No, I didn't see any of it.
I just wondered about that, because the performance from Anthony Hopkins as the magician and ventriloquist, who becomes more or less taken over by his puppet, is incredible. Have you seen the film, obviously?
Oh, quite a few times. One thing that was quite touching was when I was recording the score for 3 days, Tony was there the entire time. This has never happened before. Once in a while, one of the actors may come in and say hello and listen for about 3 minutes, because a recording session for a motion picture can be quite dull and tedious. It's not all that glamorous. But Tony was there the entire time, and he would imitate many times. The orchestra was quite fascinated with him, and he would actually throw his voice for the orchestra. We were all amazed, because to stop and think that this man trained himself to be a ventriloquist for this motion picture is an incredible testament to this man's gift and talent and tenacious determination. But he could really do it. He put a pencil in his teeth and was throwing his voice.
I'm sure he's going to get an Oscar nomination at least for that part, but I'm interested to hear you say that, because, of course, making a film, an actor could perfectly well cheat as far as pretending to be a ventriloquist is concerned. But he really did it.
He really did it. And that was really quite amazing. I couldn't believe it, but he did.
Shall we listen to some music from Magic now? It must be quite hard music to write, because it's a very kind of closed-in thing. Would you like to pick some?
I guess probably the best thing is just the theme from the picture.
Jerry, in the past, you've done a great deal of work also for television in addition to films, and in fact you've won several awards for your music for television series and programs. You seem to have abandoned that rather now. What's the reason for that?
Well, there are several reasons. Mostly I've been involved in feature motion pictures, but that really isn't the real reason. Is that there are not that many interesting things or the time to do them in television. I mean, a QB7 comes along once in a lifetime, and it was phenomenal because it was really the first of the long-form television shows, and plus a marvelous story. And it was like just doing a theatrical motion picture. And when I did The Red Pony, Henry Fonda, it was the same thing, a beautiful film. Television being what it is, it's a wonderful medium, but it requires so much product that one just doesn't have the time to devote to it, to think as much about it, and therefore the projects are not as interesting.
Well, Jerry, let's listen anyway to some music that you did write for a television success, a big one that you worked on in the 60s. It's your theme from Dr. Kildare. But, Jerry, unfortunately, it's the last piece that we have time for in the programme, so let me just say thank you very much for coming in to talk to us. And by the way, there's still so much we haven't discussed. Will you come back and chat to us again?
I'd love to. You just say when.
Well, in that case, let's make it next Monday. Okay, meanwhile, thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, there you are. Monday next, then, for another date with Jerry Goldsmith. Jerry, very nice to have you back on the programme again.
Thank you.
And I'd like to start by coming right up to date and talk to you about one of your recent assignments, the first great train robbery. Now, the story of that is set around the 1850s. When you're writing to evoke a certain time, do you actually study the music of the period at all?
Well, this was one of the great joys, was doing Great Train Robbery. I think the first day I sat down to work and the theme came to mind. And as far as doing any research, well, this was Victorian. But since she reigned for so many years, there were quite a few divergent art styles that happened during that period. So there's no really Victorian music. And so what I tried to do in this film is give it sort of a 19th century feel with a 20th century feel mixed up into it, such as doing what almost turned out to be 19th century chord progressions, but then all of a sudden there's a twist or something, and it doesn't quite go in the direction that one traditionalist or one purist would expect it to go. I've never done a film like this before, which was great fun for me because it's light in spirit, of a certain period, and no violence.
Well, let's listen now to the main titles from the first great train robbery, because I think they illustrate that very well. Jerry, last time you were here, you brought your wife along with you, and in fact, she is a lyric writer, isn't she? Because I think I'm right in saying that she wrote the lyrics for the song The Piper Dreams from The Omen.
That's right. Yeah.
Did she write a lot of lyrics for you?
We did quite a few together. We haven't lately.
You make a good team, or do you tend to argue about it?
We're much more honest with each other. I mean, she's terribly honest with me about what I do, and I'm very honest with her. I feel much more comfortable working with her as a lyricist than with anyone else. I think she's the best one I've ever worked with.
Well, let's listen then to one of the results of that collaboration. Here it is, The Piper Dreams from The Omen. Jerry, apart from having a wife who writes lyrics, your son, in fact, is trained as a musician, hasn't he? Because I believe he's, at the age of 19, just completed his first film score.
Yes, he did, as a matter of fact. I was quite proud of him. He hasn't really had all that much formal education in music, but he has a great gift for electronic music. And I think the picture he did was called Laser Blast. I went to the recording he was doing a couple of times, and I must say I was astounded. I was almost to tears to see how well he did with it.
Is he, in fact, going to follow in your footsteps and do film music, or is that certainly part of something else he's interested in?
Well, he's very interested in sound. He's been doing production sound for quite a few motion pictures, and now he's working in a record studio as a mixer. He's mixing some albums, and he's also making his own album. So at an early age like that, boy, you can try everything out. Right. So we'll see which direction he goes.
We were talking before we digressed about your son, about the Omen. What about Damien Omen 2? How did you find that as a sort of follow-on from The Omen?
Well, I think the film is very good. I think musically it was one of those situations where the pattern had been set, and it was hard to deviate. I found going back to something that I had done 2.5 years earlier a bit strange, because I felt that I had grown in different directions, and so I was sort of retrenching myself to use the same material. And I tried expanding it and developing it in certain ways, and yet retain the original flavor. Generally, I am not a great one for sequels. I think when you've done it once, it's a tremendous excitement, and one should move on. It's still more or less based on the same thematic ideas and motivic ideas as the first. I mean, there were 3 or 4 or 5 minutes that are literally from the first film, but the rest is a development of what I did originally.
Jerry, we've had a lot of requests, and in fact we keep getting them, for music from the Western that you wrote, The Wild Rovers. That's very popular with the people who listen to this program. Is it popular with you?
I like it very much. I was always very fond of the picture and the score. It was one of the few films, except maybe The Gunfighters, that really portrayed cowboy life as it really was, not the romantic way that it had been for 50 years in Hollywood portrayed.
There's also a song in The Wild Rovers, which I know you've got something you want to say about.
It's Family Day. Well, the song was lovely. I mean, it's a real cowboy song. And part of it's based on an old American folk song, Right Old Paint, which Copeland has used and Virgil Thompson has used. And many people say, well, you stole from Copeland. That's not at all. I mean, it's pure Americana, so part of the song is that. But the lyrics were wonderful, and it really got in sort of representative of what a cowboy's life is like on and off the horse. I re-recorded the album, actually, here in London. And I had the strange idea that I would like a rather naive voice singing this rather gruff song. So my daughter sang them. So it came out quite well. And it's rather interesting because the whole thing starts with sound effects. And I was trying to portray the idea that the cowboys getting up in the morning after having 2 or 3 days off in town. They're hungover and they spend all their money and generally dejected. And at 5 a.m. in the morning, they're going out for another 2 or 3 weeks in the plains, which are pretty rough. And that was the whole feeling of the opening.
Jerry Goldsmith's daughter there. Jerry, what's her name, actually?
Her name is Ellen Coleman now. She just graduated from college. She's teaching school.
She's not singing anymore.
No, she decided not to.
Pity, really, because I liked her singing there. But anyway, let's listen now to an instrumental piece from the same film. This is called Bronco Bustin'. Another part of your score for The Wild Rovers. Bronco Bustin', that was called. Jerry, you do, of course, work a lot over here, too, don't you? What are you involved in at the moment?
Well, I'm doing a film called The Alien, which will be out in May. It's a space terror film, and it is scary.
Well, we'll look forward to that one, but the one that we're next going to be seeing is The Boys from Brazil, which you did. Tell me something about that.
Well, I think it's a terrific film. It continues my collaboration with Franklin Schaffner, which has been going on for over 20 years. And every film he does is always special. And I think that somehow he brings out the best in me. If I look back at all the scores I've done for him, I always find that there's something rather interesting and different about them all. Patton with the Planet of the Apes, Papillon, Islands in the Stream, and now Boys from Brazil.
What I'd like to play now, Jerry, the song from that picture, the Boys from Brazil, it's sung by a lady very well known in this country because she sprang to overnight fame in Evita, that stupendous musical, and that's Elaine Page. Tell me a little bit about the song.
Well, the song is totally alien to anything else in the score. I mean, it's a contemporary song, but it was used as a piece of source music, that is, music that's playing within a scene from a phonograph record. And it was used twice in the film, strangely enough, under a killing, under a murder, so that's why it was in the film. But it has nothing to do with any other part of the film. It's only used in one area, and it's really not representational of the rest of the music. But it's a nice song, and she sings absolutely divinely.
As you said before we played that song for the Boys of Brazil, it's not, in fact, representative of the sort of music you wrote. Would you, at this point, like to choose something that is more representative?
I think that the main title is the big Viennese waltz, which opens the picture. I think it's sort of a fun piece. I always had a lot of fun writing that one. But within it, you will notice it gets very dramatic and rather foreboding, which is, again, mixing in one theme for Laurence Olivier with the motif that will become the theme for Gregory Peck. So, hope you enjoy it.
It's a lovely piece, and I must say I'm very much looking forward to seeing the Boys from Brazil. Unfortunately, that brings us to the end of the show, so Jerry Goldsmith, thank you very much for coming in to talk to us again.
It was great to be back here again. Thank you.